Welcome to People Power Social Club, our daily digital event space ensuring no one feels isolated or alone whilst we spend more time at home.
Rice is Rice. Welcome to Rice is Rice, a podcast about the British East Asian experience and all things Asian and not. I'm Jem. I'm 1/3 of the Rice is Rice team. I do it with my two friends, Akina and Connor, who I think are actually listening in right now, so they are here. And today, I'm serving rice with a side of podcasting 101. So that little intro there is how we usually introduce our podcast. I thought I'd give you a little insight into how we do it, and I kind of phrase this in the same way as we would if we were doing it through the podcast. So the first thing that I would suggest when you're coming up with a podcast, if you're interested, is the topic. You really, that's obviously the most important thing, that when you start a podcast, you need to know kind of what it is that you're going to be talking about, and that thing that will distinguish you from other podcasts out there. And for that, what's really important is sorting out kind of the why and the what. So why did you want to start the podcast in the first place? This is, for me personally, I think it's really important to distinguish this, as it not only helps you come up with a topic, but it will also become your driving force to continue to produce the content, that when things get tough and things are a little bit more difficult to do, such as like now with lockdown, reminding yourself, like, why is it that I wanted to start this podcast in the first place? That is what's going to want to keep you going. And then also, what is it that you're wanting to achieve? What's the message? What do you want to come out of this content? For us personally, for us personally, we wanted to create a podcast because we felt that there was a lack of representation within this area. So I'm not sure if any of you guys kind of know anything about like Asians, but for us, we saw that there was a lot of content in America with American Asians, and them kind of talking about their experiences, and that was really great. And I think that kind of representation for me was still super useful, but the American culture is still super different to the British culture, and so our experiences still differ from Americans. And so we thought that one thing that was kind of missing within this field. And then for me personally, when I was growing up, so I was born in Philippines, and when I moved over here, my parents tried to raise me in a very traditional Filipino way. And for me, that was great, and I love my culture, but it also came with difficulties because I felt a lot when I was growing up that I was being pulled between two different cultures, and I was having like an identity crisis, like, who am I? Like, am I Filipino? Am I British? And that was super difficult for me. So when I was growing up, I would search up on Google, oh, any other Filipinos going through similar things as me? And I couldn't find anything, and I felt super alone and more confused. And so when I was growing up, I realized that I wanted to create some kind of content that if there was anyone else going through a similar situation as I was, that they'd be able to find something online to make them feel less alone. I might not be able to give great advice, but at least they know that there's other people going through the same thing. And initially, when I was at uni, I was thinking of doing it as a blog, but then I realized my strength is more within speaking than in writing. And then I've known Akina since I was a child. Connor's her boyfriend. So we kind of all came together because we realized we had a mutual interest in this, and Rice is Rice was born. So for us, our topic is centered around the British East Asian experience, and we talk about a range of different things. So we have our general kind of topics in terms of like our most recent podcast episode was about assimilation. We've also talked about interracial relationships, creative careers. So it's a range of different things, that how our upbringing may have affected our way of thinking around that area. But then we also have some episodes that are about kind of the specials episodes, where we talk about things that we've read recently or watched recently, and then kind of again, if our like the way our thinking affects that, or like what we found interesting. And then we have guest episodes as well, because for us, the focus on our podcast isn't just for British East Asians to appreciate. What we want to do is kind of, through what we're sharing, is to take away kind of any sense of ignorance around the area or like lack of knowledge, and we bring in guests who are from other cultures as well, and we discuss again different topics and how our way of thinking kind of affects that. So then next is the team. Now, this is obviously the who, and you can perfectly produce a podcast on your own. I have plenty of friends who are able to do it, and it's amazing. And I think absolutely, like, you shouldn't feel any pressure to have to do it with people if you're more comfortable as doing it with as a solo project. And I think what's important as well is to have a look at what your topic is about. For us, because our topic was about different experiences, it was important for us to do it as a team, and because I couldn't do that on my own and then just talk about my experience, and my experience is so different from Akina's and Connor's. So for me, I wanted to do it with the team to make this kind of more well represented. And so we have three brains. So Akina is a Filipino who was born in Philippines and came over here, but her parents and her family kind of generally more liberal, and she grew up being able to really decide who she was, and that was something I really admired in her as a kid. Like, I actually went to her a lot for advice when I was younger, because she just knew herself really well, I think, from an early age. And then Connor is Chinese, but he was born here and raised here, so he has that experience. He still experiences racism, and people tell him, like, you have an accent, when he's never lived in China and he couldn't have. But so he has experiences kind of, whereas like me and Akina kind of ish were brought between two different cultures. He was always in England. And the great thing about us is, I think, we have very different upbringings, different experiences, but then we balance each other out. And I think hopefully our podcast comes as a more well represented piece when people do listen to it. I think also personally the thing I love most about any kind of creative project is collaboration. I think it really helps with growth. For us, I think, we really are able to push each other more, and also sometimes, like, there are things that I might not necessarily realize that I'm doing, and Akina and Connor can call me out on that and push me to be better the same way as I can do that for them. So I really like collaborating, and it also helps. Like, there's some days when you can't think of anything creatively and you don't know where to go with it, and then when you're working with a team, they can help that conversation going. And if you do kind of decide to pursue a podcast on your own, which is great, I still do think it's great to consult with friends and, like, talk to friends and see their opinions on it, and that way it can help you grow and improve. And like, speaking on a podcast, I've learned, is very, very different to speaking with friends in real life. So I'm a huge chatterbox. I'm a very, like, sociable person, and I like chat nonstop. Akina has a joke where she said whenever I was on the phone with her when I was a kid, sometimes she'd, like, put the phone down and, like, go do other things, and she'd pick it up and I'm still going on about the same thing. And so one thing that I've learned with this podcast is that the way you talk on a podcast is very different to the way you talk with friends, and that's something that I still do now. And I really appreciate it when Akina and Connor kind of tell me, like, Jem, you need to, like, stop rambling and kind of have a bit more direction. So that is great. And then so I thought I'd take you in through, like, the team. So the organized one is Akina. She gets shit done. So Akina's background, she is a producer. She is amazing at, like, organizing and is a schedule queen. I'm hugely unorganized. I just have no sense of order ever, but she is amazing at it, and she kind of deals with a lot of our scheduling and knowing, like, when are we recording, this is how long it will take, and she just sorts all that out. Also with guests, she tends to organize it with guests, and she's, again, really great with that. And she's great with kind of keeping the eye on the clock, because like I said, like, we have so we do our episodes usually around 30 minutes long, and then our guest episodes are about an hour. But so she also puts a sense of order and all of the manic, unorganized, creative ideas of minds. She kind of deals with the production plan, and produced by trade, so she's very great at that. And she makes sure we don't ramble. And then in terms of, like, personality wise, I think Akina is one of, like, the wisest people I know. She's very well read, and I have no better way of describing this word. And I know she's listening, and I don't like this word personally, but I'm going to use it. She's very woke. She's very well read, and she constantly, I think, tries to better herself by reading more material and to take away any kind of ignorance that she may have grown up with that society's put on her. So when we do podcasts, she really provides really well thought out kind of insightful facts and opinions. And yeah, amazing at it. And so the next person is a techie one. So Connor, he makes sure we sounds good. He is an editor, film editor, and he is amazing at that. And he's also great with us here, where he helped to sort out kind of our equipment, and he bought all the right stuff. Like, I have no idea about anything to do with any equipment, couldn't tell you a single camera or whatever, but he sorts all that out. He bought us all the mics, and later on I'll show you a little clip of our like before and after in terms of our recording process, and the improvement that's happened through our podcast has been amazing. And it's all really, I think, down to the equipment. At the beginning, it just didn't sound very podcasty, and now I think we're at a place where we think it sounds pretty good. There's obviously still improvements that we're going to make along the way, but we're really happy with how it is right now. So yeah, he sorts out kind of the setup. He knows how to put everything together. Again, I have no idea what that is. Like, me and Akina tried to help, but then Connor really does take the lead. He's really great at that. And then he also edits the audio. Again, don't know how to edit, so Connor is really good at that. And I think personality-wise, Connor is really great at balancing Akina and I out, because obviously me and Akina, we've known each other since we were like 6. And most especially, I think, at the beginning of starting that podcast, there are times when it seems like we're just like chatting as friends and we'll refer to people, but then not give like the audience a context. And Connor's really great at balancing us two out. So yeah. And then there's me, the social one. And I just don't stop talking. And I feel like I'm going over time already here because I just can't seem to shut up. So I say I edit the photos and videos for social. That is supposed to be my job, but admittedly, I've been very poor at that. Our social media game is really quite bad. We have like 3 posts, and we started the podcast in November, and I was supposed to sort out like a social media plan and edit all the stuff, but I am unorganized and I feel like I never have enough time for anything, and that's something I'm working on. And then I kind of take a lead on interacting with listeners, and that's supposed to be my job because I'm the social media person, but sometimes we get messages in and I'll reply to people. And then again, promote. I actually do a lot more promoting within my own like personal social media account, just because I have more followers on there. So I've done a few kind of like shout out, call out kind of things. And yeah. And then I thought I'd add and I illustrated this, but then Connor is really very handy with Photoshop. He sorted out kind of like the branding, and I did the illustrations of us. And then, but I'd say like overall it's a team effort. I don't think we necessarily all keep on to the like specific roles that we have that I've just stated. Again, like I mentioned before, we're really great at balancing each other out and helping each other out where we can. Like, I wouldn't have known, like half the things I know now I wouldn't have known had it not been for like Connor teaching me. Like, for example, some of the video edits that I have done, I was on the phone with Connor the entire time and he was teaching me how to do it. And it's been really great because I feel like I've grown personally as well, and in my skills, and that's through collaborating with them too. And yeah, so the next is name and branding. We came up with Rice is Rice. Akina kind of came up with the idea from Joe Coy, who is a Filipino-American comedian. The idea of Rice is Rice is, it's a joke as saying that like all Asians are the same. Rice is rice, and the whole point of our podcast is to show that not all Asians are the same. We all have very different experiences. There's also multiple different kinds of Asian, because it's surprising that, like, well, actually it's not that surprising. When I was growing up, loads of people just used to say to me like, oh, you must be from China, right? Because like Asia, China, like that's the same thing. So yeah, we thought we'd kind of be ironic with it and got Rice is Rice. And then this is our kind of like name, kind of branding logo. So to kind of keep with the theme of rice, we put it on a rice bag. And I'm not sure, I'm sure you guys have had rice, but like that's kind of generally what rice bags look like. And then next is the production plan. That is super important. I didn't realize the importance of a plan until doing this podcast. I think having some sort of structure is super important to, again, like say, keep to time, or just even make sure that you're not rambling. I think for our podcast personally, we don't spend any time on scripting. The whole point of our podcast, we wanted to make it seem like a conversation that you're talking with friends, and to make it as relatable as possible. So we don't do any kind of scripting really. During our production plans, especially with guests, we kind of lay out what the general topics that we want to talk about and the general things we may want to cover, just so that we can make sure during the podcast we cover everything we wanted to. At the very beginning, we didn't really do that very well, so it did mean that like we rambled quite a bit, but that's something we've improved on after listening over to our old podcast episodes. So yeah, that is important, planning it out as much as you can, but having the kind of ad lib kind of part of that podcast I think is still quite important. And then next is how. So equipment and setup, I've kind of covered that with Connor, but this is Akina and Connor's apartment. So we record there usually, on their cute little sofa corner. And I don't know the name of any of the equipment, so I can't say. We have mics and we have the things that cover the mics, the sponges. But say for me, those sponges and the cover thing is super important, because I didn't realize I did this until Connor told me that I apparently act a lot when I talk. So that kind of takes that away a little bit and doesn't make it sound as harsh. And we also do film it because our plan is to release like parts of the episode onto YouTube. The reason why we wanted that again is to kind of make it as relatable as possible, that if people can maybe see our faces, they can feel like it's more personal. And then next is kind of how we broadcast it out. So for us, we use Buzzsprout as our main thing. So Buzzsprout allows us to put it out onto Spotify, onto Apple Podcasts, and other podcasting sites. I think we're on like Google Podcasts and some other ones, but the ones we really focus on is Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and that's where most of our listeners listen in. So that is our most recent stats. And the great thing about Buzzsprout is I think that there's definitely other sites that you can use, but for us, we love Buzzsprout. It gives us really great stats. You can see how many people are listening. You can see where people are listening from. Like we've had people in New Zealand listening, and I'm like, wow, that's so crazy. But yeah, so it's a super great kind of portal to summarize everything, kind of keep you up to check. And I would recommend trying to find a site like that to help release everything. We have a paid for subscription, but it's not very expensive when you split it between us three. But yeah, I would recommend that. And then next is the social media marketing. Again, slightly covered this. Very poor right now, but it's a work in progress. This is just a little example of what I put on my own like social stories. And I try to get people involved and make it a little fun to kind of grab people's attention, so it's not just like, hey, there's a podcast. Yeah. And so growth. What I would say, it's super important to listen back over your podcast. At the beginning, I found it very weird to like listen back over my own voice, and then it like you get overcritical. But then at the same time, it's really important to be critical of yourself so you can know how to improve the next time. One thing we noticed, say for example, was the fact that like at the very beginning, our first ever episode, it didn't sound very podcasty at all. And so then we improved on that to try and make it sound more professional. So I included little sound bites here. So the left one is our first ever episode, and the right one's our most recent episode. So let me know if you can hear it, by the way. I'm not sure whether it will.
Welcome to Rice is Rice, the podcast about the British East Asian perspective on all things Asian. And not.
I'm Akina.
I'm Jem.
And I'm Connor. And I failed my maths exam in AS level.
Very not the stereotype.
Very not.
So if you listen in there, it sounds a little bit echoey. And then this is our most recent.
Welcome to Rice is Rice, a podcast about the British East Asian experience where we talk about all things Asian and not.
I'm Connor.
I'm Jem.
I'm Akina, and all throughout.
So so that's a little example. So we added the sound effects in just to make it sound a little bit more fun straight away and more engaging. We also, I didn't include it in that bit, but we have like rice sound effects to kind of keep to the theme as well. So there was that huge difference, and ultimately the kind of recording was down to the equipment that we were using. So that's really improved, and we're really kind of happy with how it is sounding now. And then now, obviously, I thought I'd refer to lockdown. This has probably been the most challenging part so far, because I think it's when you're with each other, you can bounce off each other really well, and you can sense each other out, especially with guest episodes. But we've had to adjust with lockdown, and we didn't want to just stop creating, because I think right now something that's helping me cope is knowing that I'm still producing something. I think if I wasn't, I'd feel like an absolute like I'm going crazy, and at least now it's a coping mechanism, and to still get to plan with them, and it makes me feel like life is still going on as normal as it can be. So what we've done, we've started remote recording, and what we'll do is like we'll have each other on FaceTime, and I'll have one set of headphones in, then I have like a big set of headphones over that so I can hear my own voice plugged into my laptop. And I had to buy my own kind of recording equipment, because everything was left in Akina and Connor's flat. So I bought my own, which was like super cheap from Amazon, like £40. So you can literally start a podcast, have a cheap as you want. And it's not as great as equipment as what we usually use, but it does the job. And I think with the guest episode, so we recorded one with my friend Alex, and that was quite difficult because we felt that there were a lot more gaps than there usually would be when we're recording. Just because, again, like when you're not together, you don't bounce each other the same, and there's like delays. Delays are a huge thing. Like if your Wi-Fi is a bit shit, the delays are like, I'll be laughing like 5 seconds after Akina and Connor have said the joke. So it kind of like it does make things a little bit more difficult, but I think we're just about managing. And I am still glad that we're doing that. And we definitely improved from the first episode we recorded during lockdown to now. At the beginning, it took ever to set up, forever to do sound checks. I think that's another thing really important if you're starting to do anything remotely, is like do the sound checks, because what we realized the first time around when we weren't really checking it over, my mic had gone really weird and made me sound like a monster. It was awful, and we had to cut out a massive chunk of what we'd recorded. But now I think we're starting to adjust a bit better, and it's working a lot more. So that's lockdown. And then the most important thing I think also is to enjoy. It's so important to enjoy what you're doing within anything creative, because to keep you going on that journey, you need to like have a good time with it. And also, especially since like we don't get any money from this or anything at all, we're just doing this for us. If we didn't enjoy it, then I think the whole process would just be awful. But yeah, and also one thing I wanted to mention, something about that I enjoy, is that hearing some feedback is amazing. Even if it's friends, or like we've had people who we don't know comment back to us and say like how they've enjoyed it. And so my friend Alex that we did an episode with, he's queer, and he got a message from someone we don't know, no one knows who this person is, but they messaged him and said like, I really related to you, and I'm so like glad that I found this podcast, because I thought I was going through this alone, that I identify as being queer as well, and to be able to see someone out there who's got a very similar story to me is really comforting. And when he sent that over to me, like it brought me to tears. I was so happy, because I could see that we were achieving some of the things that we wanted to achieve, and that's really helped me keep enjoying the process. And especially since like it happened during lockdown, I was like, yes, someone's listening during lockdown. So yeah, that was great. And then you can find us every Wednesday. Listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Rose is right. There you go.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jem, for your presentation. Let's do our round of applause.
Thank you. Sorry for overgoing my time.
Not at all. It's just perfect. Does anybody have any questions for Jem about podcasting or about Rice is Rice or the experiences?
I have a quick question. You were talking about a site that you were using, but I didn't understand the name when you were broadcasting. What's the name?
Buzzsprout. So BUZZSP
PUZZ?
B.
B.
Yeah.
Buzz.
Yeah, buzz.
Like a buzz.
Yeah, like a bee. Like
Yeah.
a buzz. Yeah, Buzzsprout.
Buzzsprout. Super. Perfect. Thank you very much.
No problem.
If I understand right, you have to like upload it to somewhere, and then Spotify and all these places are picking it up from somewhere else. So that's one of the.
Yeah, so it kind of like sends it to them, I think. Yeah.
I have a question, but if anybody else has one first. Oh, I'll go for it then. I was curious if you could perhaps point out a very curious British expression of yourself you have, as in something you do that's very British, and then a very Filipino expression that comes out of you, that not an expression spoken, but like a behavior or an idea. Have you got like one from each culture that they don't match, but they're both you?
Let me think. I think I don't know whether this is for the answer, but I've kind of podcast that my accent changes when I speak to Filipinos and non-Filipinos. So if you guys, any of you do actually listen to the podcast, I don't sound anything like this. I speak in like a more American Filipino accent, and that's my kind of, I naturally adapt to it. I would say my real accent is actually my Filipino accent, and I've just adapted to speaking a British accent, and now I feel really uncomfortable if I ever speak in like my Filipino accent to non-Filipinos. I think something that's very generally so Filipinos are very like Catholic, very religious, and so quite old-fashioned in the way of their thinking. I think for me, like even though I'm still religious, I think I definitely am way more open-minded and very, very liberal. That's something that I think I struggled with the most when I was growing up. Like I am a very, very liberal person, and I think it's happened naturally when you grow like the British culture is, I think, way, way more accepting than a Filipino culture, and that's something I've taken from here that I absolutely love, and I think for me that's worked. Something that I've taken maybe from the Filipino culture, I don't know, maybe the food. Like that's probably the main thing. Like I love the food, big food, and also the family aspect. One thing about Filipinos is that hugely family orientated. Like everything centers around your family. So for me, every decision I make, I have in mind like what my family are going to think about it, what they'd like me to do, or whatever. And yeah, I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but
that was brilliant. Thank you, Bernie. Question.
You, if I heard correctly, you started this around November, right?
Yes, our first episode was November, mid-November, maybe.
And how did you define your kind of success rate? How do you think? How do you know that you're somehow progressing in content, in reaching out? What has been your experience in if knowing if it's kind of worth continue doing that? Who is your audience? Like, how do you quantify yourself? Success or not success? Like,
Buzzsprout firstly is a really great way. Like I mentioned, it gives you stats on how many people are still listening, and whether like that's going up in numbers, whether it's going down in numbers, and also like where in the world people are listening from. I think for me personally, I don't really look at the numbers as much. I kind of look more as to the feedback that we get. So so for example, like what I mentioned with that person messaging Alex, that's how I kind of quantified, oh, we're doing what we want to do because people we don't know are reaching it. And also I've actually met a few more content creators on Instagram they like messaged me and just said, oh, I've listened to your podcast, absolutely love it. And I think it was the creative careers one where I realized like, oh, it's working, people are listening, because someone had messaged me on Instagram said and promoted it on their own page, and I thought that was pretty amazing. I had no connections with this person. Now we've actually become friends, and I'm working on another project with him alone. So that's kind of helped me realize that like this is going places and it's making it more worthwhile for me. But yeah, Buzzsprout, if you're kind of interested in more kind of numbers wise and how it's doing like that, Buzzsprout is a really great way.
And Becky, did you have a question? I saw a hand up.
I was just wondering, it's kind of similar to Bernie's, I guess, but I was wondering, what do you think is the most effective way to grow your listenership from your experience so far?
I think that's why we really need to improve on the social media game, because I think that is a huge way that it has grown. I know that a lot of our listeners have been from our own like personal like friendship groups, and then them sharing it to their friends. So that's why right now, like my personal account, I think I've got like 1,000 followers. So I know I'm reaching people through that, and I've reached people I don't know because they've shared it on. And right now our current Instagram account definitely has like less than 100 followers. So that's why we want to improve on it, because we've seen social media as being the best way that it's reaching people. So I would say, like, even though we've not done it ourselves, social media is probably like the best way to get it out there and share it amongst friends and family, and then get them to share it onwards. That's what I found helpful. Not to mention another thing, actually, I've just had a thought. One thing maybe like with podcasts, what could also help grow is we found that episodes when we're talking about something that's current in the news, that also helps it like kind of come up when people are searching things up. That was another idea. Yeah.
Let's just give Gemma another round of applause. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for today.
And yes, the podcast comes out every Wednesday. Rice is Rice, and available on all the podcast bits of software. I thought you'd come something else.
Stay safe, stay busy, and tell us a cool story next time we see you.